All systems go. We are live. What's up, y'all? We're here with folks from Storybook. We're here to talk about Storybook today. Yeah, we just had the Storybook 7 launch yesterday, so that was a whole production. That was a whole conference, I guess. Storybook Day. How did that come about? Michael, were you in? You were clearly involved. I saw you several times in Storybook Day, but yeah. So how did all this come about?
Um, I think Jan and I were both involved in kind of creating some content for it. It was organized by our DX team, and they did an amazing job of organizing it. I think this is something that we wanted to do for a long time, but it's a big operation, and so they finally bit the bullet and put it together. And It was the first time that we've ever had like a storybook specific kind of gathering other than like our little monthly meetings. And it was really fun. Uh,
Yeah, the production value on that was awesome. I think when I was joining, I was only able to stay on live for a few minutes, but I think I saw like 200 people watching live as I was going. That's pretty awesome. So props to y'all for that. I did want to ask, well, maybe as a way of introducing y'all, why don't we go around the room and like introduce ourselves and maybe say what your involvement with Storybook was, and what your favorite thing about the Storybook 7 launch was. And maybe Katerina, I know you best, so I'll start with you.
Okay. Um, well, I was super excited for Storybook Day because it would be the first time that I would be like officially involved in a storybook event, and I was really
Yeah.
happy about that. I sort of demoed, of course, the NX and Storybook integration, but the thing I was most excited about to see was the demos of the play function. This is what you call it, right? Where you push the play and you have a whole interaction going on.
Yeah.
This is the thing that excites me most about Storybook 7. And after we finish everybody telling their favorite thing, I want to ask Michael something
Cool.
in the end.
All right. Well, the suspense is killing me, but let's go to Michael next.
cool. So I'm the product lead for Storybook. I've been kind of in charge of every release of Storybook for the last 5 years, and built a lot of it as well. And My favorite part of the launch was actually just like sitting around with all the users of Storybook in the chat, and it was like a lot of work behind the event, as you can kind of imagine, like getting all this stuff together. And we're also in the middle of getting Storybook 7 ready and fixing bugs and all sorts of stuff. And so like leading up to it, it was pretty stressful, but like actually in the event, just sitting around watching a bunch of people talking about like really cool stuff with people who are like using your tools and supportive and appreciative, and it was just much more chill and fun and great than I kind of imagined going into it. Really, really nice event.
That's awesome. Yeah, my one of the biggest things for me was just seeing it felt like there was such an emphasis on the journey from Storybook being like this smaller tool. I think it was just something like, well, there's maybe a few hundred users and each one had maybe a couple stories. Now over 100,000 users, or over 300,000 users, I think it is.
Three hundred
With
thousand storybooks, probably closer to
300,
half
that's
half a
what it
million
is.
users. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and hundreds each. So we're talking about hundreds of millions of stories, literally. So that's a pretty cool, just the sheer magnitude of that. But yeah, Jan, let's start it over to you. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing pretty well. Thank you so much. I am also in the Storybook team. I've been maintaining Storybook for the past, I think, 2.5 years, where the first half I was just doing on my personal time. And then Michael grabbed me. So I am doing that full time, which is pretty much a lifelong dream since I started developing. I always really loved open source and I really wanted to be more involved. So I'm really thankful for that. And the thing that excited me the most about the Storybook 7 launch, it's like I cannot even tell one thing because I I have a huge list of things. But the fact that yeah, just like Michael mentioned, the fact that everybody was so supportive and they really liked and shared their experiences as we were going through the conference. It was amazing. I'm really excited about the testing capabilities of Storybook because, of course, I'm involved with them. But I'm also very excited about what people are going to do with it. And I don't know if you noticed, but there's one person in the community which has the most incredible looking Storybook. It's a user called Foxhound ND or something. So he built a game on the web, but he's using Storybook to like show all kinds of stories and stuff like that. And he's using the interaction testing to actually interact with the game and play the game automatically to test his stuff, which is like mind blown.
That's really cool. What's the name of this game? Let me see if I can find it.
Oh, I can quickly find it for you if you want.
Yeah.
On the Storybook
Yes,
website.
please.
Yes.
Can I share my screen for a second?
Yeah.
All right. So on the Storybook websites, I don't know if a lot of people know about this, but there's a new button here called Showcase.
There we go.
And yeah, it's a project called Component Encyclopedia. It was built by the DX team, which is fantastic. So it's essentially like a big catalog of all sorts of components and stories built by other people, which are all gathered in the same page. So for instance, if you want to say like, oh, I want to develop a card component, I can just search for cards.
This is so cool. So you can search for anyone's cards in the whole shirt. Oh, that's really neat.
And then you pretty much like get to see them at a first glance, but you can also like, oh, Adobe is creating a card component. I can click on that. And then their hosted Storybook is going to load. And then I can actually access their whole Storybook and see what they're doing, which is like fantastic.
You know, so, I had never even considered Storybook as like a source of inspiration, but that's what this is. That's what this is right here. It's like, exactly like you said. If I want to get a card component, I can just search for a card. I can see all of the card components that all of these, like there's Adobe's card component. That's mind blowing.
Yeah. And if you go all the way to the bottom, there's like featured components. Okay. So we have stuff from NASA, we have stuff from Shopify. We have this like one of my favorite React libraries about Windows 95.
Is this Windows 95? Oh my goodness.
And it's so crazy that like they styled the actual Storybook UI. So like all the fonts are like, it's incredible. But anyways,
I need to build something with this now. I feel like that is so cool. All right.
So you get this Foxhound DN, yeah, there you go. Foxhound DN, that's the project. It's called Syntax, and it's essentially it's a full-fledged game, and then you can see like each story relates to a specific state of that game. And for instance, like there's these 4 panels, and each of the panels they have different angles and stuff, and you can actually interact. So let's say like this pickups story. I'm probably not sharing my audio, but there is audio. And I can actually walk around and, like shoot and just get this pickup and whatnot.
You're using the keyboard now, right?
Yeah.
I am using, yes, that is correct. I can just like move as I press, which is like fantastic. And the thing is, I can just press escape and then start using my mouse normally again. And this is like insane because as you're developing a game, like if anyone in the community has been working with like stuff like Unity or some other game engine, sometimes it's like tough to load into a specific state so that you can actually like jump and test that specific thing. But right now, with Storybook, he was actually able to like create as many scenarios as he wants using the actual like all the add-ons that we also provide, which is super awesome.
This is really cool. So like this could be a literal like test harness for your game. Like if you want to test out some new like movement mechanic or something, you can use Storybook and you can see it from, as we can see, 4 different angles as we go. That's pretty
fantastic.
Cool. That's okay. I think that takes the cake for the coolest thing about Storybook. But yeah, these are things I was expected to come on this stream and we were going to talk about components and all this board stuff and just put it up on a screen. But no, we just did video games. Look at us. That's what I got into this industry for, actually, was to become a video game developer. So now I can,
there you go.
I can cross that off my list. But yeah. Katerina, we wanted to talk about. Well, we're here for NX, obviously, so we did
Wait,
want to show. Oh yeah.
before we go there, this is so actually what Jan just showed really helps me more with the question I wanted to ask
Oh
Michael.
right.
Like, yeah, so Michael, you were the one of the people who started Storybook, right?
We took it over from another team very early on. It was pretty small at the time and grew it into what it is today. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that the way Storybook evolves, and especially version 7, or the way it evolves over time, or as I've seen it in the past 2 years, it's become so much more than a tool for testing components in isolation, or drafting out scenarios, or creating like a catalog of components or whatnot. It sort of makes other tools like for testing obsolete almost, So did you see this as a vision like many years ago, or how how do you feel about this evolving into something so much bigger than
It's all part of my 10-year plan where we actually go.
I knew it.
We do it.
Uh,
This is just one
No,
step.
no. It's really evolved quite organically, and I'm a very kind of bottom up person, and so a lot of the stuff is working that way. I think even prior to kind of taking over the project, Storybook was already had an add-on system. It didn't have many add-ons at the time, but like that was one of the first things that the original authors had added. And there was kind of this idea that Storybook would be a Swiss Army knife that could do a lot of different things, and we didn't know what it would do, what it would be yet. And so over the past 5 years, we added a whole bunch of stuff to it. I think the big thing was around adding different frameworks, or we call them renderers, like Vue and Angular and so forth. And then figuring out how to make our add-ons compatible with all of those things. And there's like actually a lot of, not super interesting, but kind of tricky stuff that needs to happen to make it all work well together. And to some degree, we're still figuring it out. But yeah, then we built an add-on catalog in the site that looks similar to the component catalog, where we have 500 add-ons from the community. But I guess over the last couple years, we've really started to figure out what is Storybook essentially, and so kind of settling down on documentation and testing and kind of design handoff as like three key components to building UIs. And so now like we're in the process of really investing in each of those areas and tightening it up, and it'll still be a Swiss Army knife, and we'll still have add-ons from the community, and there may be other things that we haven't thought of, but I think we got to this point by building a whole bunch of different add-ons and sort of throwing it out there and seeing how people used it, and now we're kind of more in the like tightening phase, where we know what it's good for. That
Yeah,
I also
oh, sorry.
No, I think it's quite important to also mention that this is not a vision of one person. This is all about open source. Open source, like there's over 16 or actually 1,800 contributors that have contributed to Storybook so far. And with just like Zach is showing now, we have this amount of community add-ons, which is like so incredible. And a lot of people are doing so much stuff with Storybook. So even before the testing capabilities of Storybook were implemented, there was one add-on from, if I'm not mistaken, from developers at Confluence. It's called Add-on Performance. And they actually created something that allowed you to check the rendering, like, I think that's the one. Yeah, the first one.
The top one.
Yeah, so it helps you like check the rendering performance of your components, but it also helps you if you want to add some interactions on top of it. Maybe at somewhere bottom at the documentation, you might even find something about React testing library. So that's like one example. Yeah, you could see over there if you scroll just a little up. Yeah, that's an example where you can actually like do a fire event for mouse down and such. So this is all a conglomerate of ideas that end up becoming something more like polished over time.
Yeah.
Um,
That
and
was the
that's
thing that
the
was
magic of
so
open source.
apparent just looking at the top level. Like the sheer number of downloads for these, but two, it's like the contributors here are like prominently displayed as well. So it's yeah, it's clearly it seems to me clearly a vibrant community with well anytime you can have a plugin like this is not Storybook, this is a plugin with over 3 million downloads. That's pretty awesome. So
3 million downloads a week.
that's a week. Oh
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. Those are. I
Wow.
mean, they're NPM downloads, so a lot of
Yeah,
them are CI runs and so forth. But yeah.
fair enough. But yeah,
Uh,
so we have the atoms up top, but then there's also the recipes that y'all mentioned. This is new, correct?
Yeah,
For
it's a fantastic work that Sean from the DX team has been working on, and
Mhm.
he's incredible. He's basically experimenting and helping so many different communities that use different tools, and he's trying his best to both develop content to help you set up stuff, but also some add-ons to also quick like bootstrap your experience, so you have a
yeah,
more seamless experience throughout your
yeah.
project.
Was he struck me as a particularly good presenter as well. For I forget what he was talking about specifically, but
He was
yeah,
talking about the integrations, and I think he's got one of his Jim Carrey like features or something like that that suits so well.
yeah,
I
so
think
you
even
forgot his
his
talk, but you
Twitter.
remember his facial expressions.
yeah. Yeah, it was kind of all a blur, a little bit. There's so much stuff. There's just so much stuff that was that came out yesterday, or that y'all were talking about. But yeah, Katerina, I know you wanted to show some stuff here about NX
Okay.
and kind of how NX fits into some of this stuff too.
Yes. So, yeah, what I want to show is that a lot of people who are a lot of people are using Storybook, as we know, and a lot of people use an X. So people who use an X, they want to use Storybook, and we have created a plugin for Storybook that helps people add. Sorry, that helps people add Storybook to their workspace sort of seamlessly, set up the dependencies they need, set up Storybook configuration, even write stories for them based on their components. So this is what I'm going to show today, and specifically I'm going to show how we have made this plugin to generate things for Storybook version 7. Um, so now, say that we have an NX workspace. I'm going to share this workspace so that people can have it on GitHub. So now we have an NX workspace that has all different kinds of projects. Like you have an X project, you have an Angular project, a React project that uses Vite, a React project that uses Webpack, a web components project. So we have all different types of projects and all different kinds of libraries, UI libraries that get imported into these applications, because the logic that the mental model that we sort of promote with an X is sort of that you have these libraries that are like the shells that are deployable, and when you have some other, for example, UI components or utilities, you create a library and you import this library into your applications. So with that in mind, again, I have created some Angular and Next and React applications. They're all the same. They're all just a simple banner and a simple button. Let's open one of these and just see what it looks like. It's just a button that takes as an input the text of the button, the color, and whether it's disabled or not. Just a simple button, and a banner that sort of takes as input the text, the background color, border width, the width and the height. Just a very simple. I'm not a good UI person, I have to say that, so you know. Nothing fancy. And exactly the same thing in React, built differently with rollup and beat, just to showcase the different bundlers. So again, a React button that takes as props, a React banner that takes as props like this. So say that you have this workspace set up like this. What you can do with an X is run a command that says, if you are using a React app, for example, that says NX generate storybook configuration for your React application. You have to pass the Storybook 7 configuration flag and tell it specifically which renderer to use. Now, maybe you will not have to do this in the future. But we still keep this because we both support now Storybook 6 and Storybook 7. And you tell it the project that you want to generate it for, and you also ask it to generate stories. And if you run this command, it will also generate a Cypress C2E application for you, and I'll show you what that looks like.
Okay, so you just copied the code, you have it on the right hand side of the screen, and you ran it in a terminal. Okay, and that terminal's set up for this workspace, right?
Yes, exactly. Okay. Sorry, I had to.
Just making sure I'm following correctly. But yeah, that seems really cool. So one of the things I love about the NX CLI is like is how configurable these things are. So it's clear from the options that you have here. There's a lot of options that we can add to what's going on inside of this generator, right? So like the Storybook 7 configuration, I imagine that's a way, like we have options here. If we want to do like Storybook 6, I don't know, would there still be people who would want to do Storybook 6 these days?
No,
I don't know what. Yeah, exactly. No, Thank you. Exactly. I was hoping for that answer. Thank you, Yann.
Good.
But just for context, Storybook 6, the last release 6.5 was quite some long time ago. I think about 9 months. We've been really like working really hard on Storybook 7. It's been 2.5 years almost. I think almost 2 years. I'm not sure. Since we made a major release. So please, when you start a project, try Storybook 7 out.
I think this is off the record. I know that we're just between us four now, nobody listens. I think starting with the next major version of NX, like NX 16, I think we're only going to allow Storybook 7. So that's like we do with Angular, for example. If you want to upgrade to NX 16, you should somehow upgrade to Storybook 7. I mean, you have all the migrators ready. The Storybook team has all the auto migrations ready. So it shouldn't be that difficult,
Yeah.
But yeah.
Let me show this real quick, actually, because this is kind of impressive. One of our engineers recently did this is like a burst chart for versions. So you give it like an NPM package, and it'll tell you what percentage of people are on which version. The amount of people on version 7 already is pretty staggering, given that y'all just came out. Like, this is really good. I guess there's still a good amount of people here on 6, but given how recent the 7 release was, I would have expected this to be much less. So this is quite
7 cool. hasn't actually been released yet. We're in RC right now. So
how?
I don't know. Cool. I'm a little suspicious of those numbers.
Yeah, let's see what's going on. I see 216,000 downloads on version 7 here. So I don't know. That's pretty nuts. This is coming from NPM too. So
wow.
Yeah, I think that's another indicator of a vibrant community here. The majority of people are already on an RC release. Yeah, that's awesome. But yeah, here I'll send it back to you, Katerina. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, and let's see what the result of that command was. And so first it generates, so for this Vita UI button library, generated this configuration file, which uses the React Vita renderer, right? Framework. Sorry, framework. It passes the Vita config path, and then let's see the story that it generated. So remember this component that we had here, it took the text, the color, and if it's disabled or not. So it generated a story for it that would take the arguments text, color, and disabled with the default values, which are just blank.
I love that.
So, so now let me git stash. Let me check out, because of course I ran everything yesterday. Yes, sorry. Let me just delete everything. Delete files. Okay, so now after I generated everything yesterday, I added another story. So we would have the primary and the disabled story. And let's take a look, and let's look at how the banner would look like, the banner story. It would look again like this, with some background color, some text, some numbers, some number inputs. Let me start installing while I show you the e3 tests. And as I said, it also generates some e3 tests, right? So for this component here that we already have the React Vite UI banner story, if we go and see the e3 test that it generated, it will have generated a new Cypress E2 test. What Cypress would do was it would start the Cypress server on port. Yeah, I don't know, where is it? Never mind. It goes on the port of Storybook, which is 4400, which is configured somewhere. And then it goes to so once Storybook starts, it has this iframe where inside it renders the story. And I will show it in a moment to you in the browser. But it will visit this, and because it would go to the primary story, because as you see here, we call this the primary. And wait, where is it? Sorry. And it would load some arguments, like for example, it would load the text, oh no, something went wrong. And then you can this is a very simple test, we will just get the p element and make sure that it contains this text, right? But imagine if you can pass in the URL all these arguments, you can test many more complex things, right? Because you just pass the props here. So now let's see how this would look. NX Storybook. To run Storybook, you just do NX Storybook, React Vite UI banner.
Okay, so React Vite UI banner, that was the name of
the name of the project. Sorry.
Okay,
yes.
So that's the React Vite version of it, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
But they will all look the same. We are going to run the Angular afterwards, and you will see that it looks the same.
Is it that when you're using NX, once you do NX run and then you insert the name of the project, after the colon, you can pass any script name that is in that project?
Yep. You can do NX run, project name, colon, script name or target name, or you could use it as a verb too. So you could say NX script name and then project name. Either way is supported. So. Nope, something went wrong, but I think that means something went right.
Yeah, exactly. So
Nice.
now you would have all these things that we did this, you just show in Storybook and how sort of NX auto generates this, and you would be able, I think there is an add-on here to actually add the color picker, but I was bored and didn't do that. But you can change the colors here and make this white, and then you would have the secondary as well, and try to test the height and everything. But I think this is going to look better in Yann's demo. I'm just showcasing the simple stuff.
Yeah. I've seen better buttons in my days, or better banners, I guess.
I'm not a UI developer. I don't know.
But so you just ran the command. This just started up Storybook itself. This wasn't
Yes.
actually running the Cypress stuff, right?
No, it was
Okay.
the Cypress stuff was just the cherry on top.
Gotcha.
It was just running the Storybook stuff.
Very
So
cool.
this is how NX sort of sets it up, and let me show you again that it does the same for Angular. So this is the React story, but we have the same thing for Angular, because again, in Angular, in React, it reads the props. In Angular, it reads the inputs, and it sort of generates a sort of the same story with the same arguments. That's, if you run it, it's going to look the same. So yeah, this is how our generator works.
May I say something? I think
Yes.
people might not see directly, but the fact that you're actually reading the metadata in the components and then doing something with it, it's fantastic. Like parsing that code, it's kind of like you need to know about compilers and all kinds of like complex stuff, and it's not an easy task at all. So it's very impressive that NX does that.
Thank you. And let me show you one last thing that we like to do. So if you go on our docs, I'm going to post this link later. We have a section called best practices, and the best practices came. This documentation was thought of after chatting with people and seeing how they use Storybook with an X. And we realized that a lot of people, the way they use Storybook with an X is like there's a company and they have a lot of libraries, right? Like here we just have just 2 libraries, but if you have a huge code base with an X, you may have like hundreds of libraries, and each library would have its own Storybook, right? So the way most of the people would do it would be that they would create one sort of host library, and in that library, they would, using a glob pattern, they would just import stories from other places if they're using the same framework, right? Because you cannot mix and match frameworks. So I sort of created this demo host here to show how you could do this as well, to sort of combine in the different Storybook different libraries. The other way you could have different storybooks within a host storybook would be to use storybook composition, but this would be up to you mostly, I think, and depending on your use case. But I'm just going to show you this now to see how it would look like. So in this project, the host project, we would just be importing stories from React libraries that use whose storybook uses React Webpack 5, and some next libraries, which again their storybook uses React Webpack 5, so that they can share a single main.js file that uses the Webpack 5 framework and can import stories from other places. So the way that would look, okay, yes. So the way that would look would be like this. You would have like in the sidebar all the different components like you would normally, and you would have all these different things from different libraries.
Okay, so this was kind of like if there was a bunch of shells, or if there was a bunch of different libraries inside of your workspace, your NX workspace, and you wanted to host it all in one storybook, this is one way you could do this.
This is one way you can do this. Yes.
Very cool. And did I see that too? Could you open up another browser to that port? If you do a smaller window to Storybook, yeah, it looks like Storybook looks different. That's really cool.
Storybook has a
is that like mobile mode?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
It's something we need to improve in a near future, but it doesn't have a bad experience if you're on your actual mobile.
Yeah, well, I imagine that's something a lot of people would actually want, because they want to use it on mobile, right? So yeah, that's really neat. I think that's pretty sweet, honestly. What y'all got right there. So
nice.
Very cool.
Okay, and that's sort of it with Storybook 7 generator. I'm going to spend like 3 minutes because I don't want to take up much time. How you could, so as I said, we do support Storybook 6. And if you have an existing NX workspace and you're in Storybook, you probably are on Storybook 6. So, as I said, Storybook offers the auto migrators. And
You know, as soon as I saw that, you know what I was thinking, Katerina? Well, because
what?
migrations, right? That's kind of what's we have the same kind of approach that we take for whenever we do another major version. We try to provide just like an easy migration script. So if you're going to the next major version of NX, you can just run the script. There's nothing else you have to do. It sounds like that's what y'all wanted to do, or what y'all did for Storybook as well. Like, is there?
Absolutely, and inspired by NX.
Oh, awesome!
I think that migration pattern is becoming more and more common across libraries these days. But I think NX was probably one of the first ones that I was aware of that did that as kind of a core part of its experience. And in Storybook, we've been like, because we're kind of creating a category and we're figuring it out as we go, we're making big changes, and so we need to migrate folks. It was really inspiring to see NX do that well.
Well, looking at that chart again, y'all did a really good job of migrating people, particularly since, as you mentioned, we're still in like the RCs. Like, maybe I can show my screen again here too.
Yes, of course.
The Storybook 7, I was looking because I was skeptical. I was like, there's no way there's this many people on RCs. But yeah, if you look at the breakdowns for your version 7 downloads, I don't see a 700 regular. These are all beta or alpha or RCs. It looks like RC1 is maybe or RC or beta 62 is the biggest over here. But yeah, like that, I am blown away by how impressive that is. So that's really cool.
Thank you.
But yeah, and it's so awesome to hear that y'all took some inspiration from us too, because this is like what we've been trying to provide for folks as a way of easily doing this. Like if you look at what migrations are, they're essentially generators under the hood, and an NX generator. I think I'm really happy with the way that API is shaping out, because it's essentially just a function that you call, just a regular TypeScript function that you would call, and you know, your file system, a virtual like snapshot of your file system gets passed in. You can do any kind of file system things you want on that snapshot, and then commit it. So yeah, that's
question about that. Were the NX generators inspired by Angular schematics?
Yes, initially that was the I guess the inspiration for some of this. So when Angular first came out, it came out with the Angular CLI. And this was kind of needed because unlike in React, where you just like make a file and like, okay, export a function, you need a bunch of stuff. Especially at the beginning, you needed a bunch of stuff to make an Angular component. So you actually had to run a command like in the terminal, ng generate something. And yeah, we kind of took that pattern and went with it and said, we can do a lot with this, including like building whole applications, building applications from other frameworks. There's nothing that should be Angular specific about any of this. So yeah, that was kind of the goal, and like some patterns from the Angular CLI 2 for their generators, or for their schematics rather, like the dry run. The dry run is, well, show me what would have happened, but don't actually do it yet because I just want to preview it. That's something we borrowed as well. So
I think users don't necessarily appreciate how much work goes into this aspect of things. Like if your configuration happens to be like a JSON file and you read it in and like update the stuff and write it back out again, that's pretty easy. But when you're modifying code, like the number of permutations of things that you can do in the code is almost infinite, and so you kind of have to like draw the line in funny places, but then even within where you drew the line, there's still a lot of different cases that you need to kind of think about, and this is all stuff that's like not really part of your day-to-day usage of the tool, but like maybe, you know, you curse because you have to spend a day upgrading or a couple of days upgrading up to a new version, but like all the stuff that goes on in the background to try to make that easy is a real endeavor.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I really like our API for this too, because generators kind of just being a simple function, it's really easy to write a test for that. For each one of those edge cases, like you mentioned, Michael, like to be like, okay, I know there's some people who are going to hit this scenario. We could just kind of like write our unit tests and say, okay, let's run that generator and make sure, what we expected to happen happens. And yeah. So
Yann, maybe we'll need to take some deeper inspiration from NX in our next iteration of the auto migration.
Well,
For sure.
I would love it for at some point, like tools like Storybook, to be able to just use our generator API, like to do something like the migration. Because, like I said, I think we've actually spent a lot of time into it, and I think it actually makes for a really good tool and a really reusable tool. Like I think. Like the NX CLI, like all this is built up to compose sort of the NX CLI. I think somewhere down the line, I think we might see, if we do our job right, we might see like whole frameworks just using NX for CLI, because most of the stuff that you need, I think, is kind of provided there. And hopefully, we'll have a better wraparound stuff, so it doesn't look like people are running NX when they're doing it. And just like, it looks like they're running, I don't know, new framework Y will be the name of their version of the CLI. But you could just use NX under the hood or something like that, So
I saw a comment in the chat in Storybook Day that there should be an industry standard for how to do these kind of migrations. And maybe there should be.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's some neat stuff we do too around there. Like I think we have options for like for the migrators specifically. We can drop there's an option to drop a commit between each step along the way, which is actually really nice. But yeah, Katerina, were you going to show like migrating from 6 to 7?
I don't think I'm going to show the whole thing.
Okay.
The only thing I wanted to say is that so Storybook, if you want to upgrade, as we told, they offer the upgrade script. They also offer the auto migrate script. And if you want to do everything and upgrade to a pre-release, you do this. You use the @next pre-release. But because NX workspaces have they are monorepos, right? So it's not like Storybook cannot, the Storybook auto migrate scripts cannot like automatically make sure that they have all the Storybook paths that they need to migrate and all the stories that they need to migrate, right? So Yann helped a lot with adjusting the auto migrate script so that they can accept specific paths that the auto migrate script would need to run on and make sure that it finds where to run. So on our side, on the NX side, what we did was create a generator. Wait, let me find it. No. Okay, yes, here it is. We created a generator that calls the Storybook Auto Migrator, but calls it for each one of the projects in the workspace that use Storybook. So we sort of wrapped the migration script inside the NX generator to do some small adjustments to the workspace, call the scripts, and then migrate your whole NX workspace automatically. So it would make life a lot easier for someone who wanted to migrate their NX workspace instead of manually running the Storybook migrations. So this is sort of helps people who use NX. Yeah.
Do it in one sweep, I guess is the idea here.
Yes.
Awesome.
I gotta say that I really love what's going on in open source land right now, where multiple projects are like collaborating together to actually like focus on bringing the best experience to people.
Yeah.
And this just happened with us and NX.
Well, like I said, it's so cool to hear that we were able to inspire y'all with some of this. And yeah, hopefully there's, having Katerina working with y'all too. It's a blessing. So yeah, but we're in like the last quarter of our time. Yann, I wanted to make sure we looked at some of your projects. So this is, maybe you can introduce it.
That sounds good. Feel free to let me know when the clock is ticking.
The
The
clock
clock's
is
my
ticking.
sharing-
always ticking, Jan. The clock is always ticking. Time marches on.
But I mean, like the Super Mario clock when it starts, the music goes
Oh, yeah.
faster.
Yeah. We'll give you like a 30-second.
All right, sounds perfect. So yeah, thanks a lot, Katerina, for demoing that. And essentially, I just want to show some cool stuff about Storybook 7 in practice. And I think one of the very first experiences you get with Storybook 7 is a performance hit.
Jan,
So
I'm
essentially-
sorry. Are you a terminal on the right kind of guy?
I'm sorry
Oh,
about
no.
that.
No, it's all right. I'm just
it's all
you're a
about
rare
window
breed.
management.
You are a rare breed. But yeah,
It's
no, sorry.
It's
I
all
interrupted.
about making the visuals for the stream. I just put it wherever it fits.
Makes sense.
So essentially, one of the first things you might notice is that in Storybook 7, there is much better support for tons of stuff because we've been working on it for a long time and we wanted to bring the best experience to people. So if you're using stuff like PM, now it's properly supported. If you're using Vite, your experience is great. So let me just run Storybook over here, which is using Vite. And it's a very interesting experience because this same project was using Webpack before and Webpack 4. And as you can see here, Storybook took about 2.2 seconds to open.
That is
And
so much faster than how I remember it. So that is really cool.
And it actually took that amount of time to load a Storybook that has over 40 different components.
Oh wow.
So it's not like a very basic Storybook. I actually have from very basic things like a button to something more complex like a restaurant card, but all the way to an entire page. So I can actually render my entire homepage in Storybook. And I think it's also a very interesting thing about the evolution of Storybook because a lot of people thought that Storybook was like only for buttons and for checkboxes. But as you can see, I have a damn page over here rendered in isolation, and I can actually list each of my pages in all of their states. Like, let me show you the real app. So this is called Meal Drop. It's just a demo app that looks like Uber Eats kind of. So if I go into a page, let's say a restaurant detail page, or actually this one, I need to be like refreshing the page so I can look at the loading state, and that sucks. But in Storybook, I don't need to do that.
You need some dev tools in here, Jan. We need to be setting some breakpoints. But
All
yeah,
right, I can actually
Storybook looks
get
easier.
that. So if I go to the restaurant detail page, because the category detail page, it's a simple component. It's just presentational. I can just pass props to get to the loading state, right? But over here, this is an actual page that is fetching data. So what if I, let's say I want to get into a error state of this page. I need to go to the dev tools. I need to find, let's say, a restaurant's fetch request. I need to block it to then get into the error state. And that kind of like sucks because not a lot of people do that. And it's difficult to like show states for your stakeholders. But
that was a beautiful error page, by the way. Like props to
Thank
you.
you so much.
I guess that has nothing to do with Storybook, but that was an amazing error page. I wish my
I
error
actually
pages
have
looked that nice.
that same page over here, which is a full page that is also doing fetch requests. However, I'm using add-on mock service worker, which uses a service worker to proxy your requests in the browser, and then it will return mocked data for you. So I actually have the loading state right here, which is actually the service worker proxying the request and not responding ever. And then I have a not found state, and I also have an error state, which are actually just like doing the actual error in the browser so that you can get the exact result you want.
So
which
this
is
isn't
insane.
simply that you're passing props to this component. This is that you're actually mocking it via Storybook on a network level.
This is a page which is like all the way to the top level of my application that has no props whatsoever. And the page does a bunch of stuff, which I don't necessarily have to care about because I can mock the requests and then just change the behavior as I want.
Right.
And maybe I can show the code for 1 second. So this is the restaurant detail page stories. And in essence, I have different stories. I have this success story where I'm passing some mock service worker handlers, just basically saying, for my URL, please return a mock for restaurants number 1. So that's pretty much one of my mock data. So if I change to number 2, oh, sorry, this is going to just change my mock data. But if I actually inspect the panel, the actual, this is getting a little out of hand. I need more space. But basically, the request is being sent, but it's being stubbed by the mock service worker. So if you see here, actually, there's a mock service worker layer, which is returning the data I want. Ooh. So this is quite exciting. So let's just say I want to make this even more exciting. So in Storybook 6, you were also able to do all of these things that I'm showing. But there's this thing that we call interaction testing, which provides you such cool functionality. So I just want to show you that. Suppose I actually want to create a new story that I render my component, and then I click on a element here that opens a modal, and I want to be sure that my component behaves correctly. So I can actually create a new story. Let's say I'm going to create a, let's say with modal open story, which is type of story. We have some types defined at the top. And in Storybook 7, we have this thing called the CSF3, which is a component standard format, which by default now is called the CSF3 version. And essentially what that means is that you don't need to actually pass a lot of data for Storybook, because it will figure out your component, and it has an implicit render function that just renders your component with the default args. So if you save this, now you have an element on the sidebar called with modal open. As you can see here, my page rendered, there was a loading state, and now there's this state.
Yeah,
this is actually...
Could I ask you, how does Storybook find this? You're just exporting some object and...
In Storybook, we have two concepts to define your story file. The first concept is you have a default export, which is what we call the meta.
Okay.
And there you define some metadata for your component. Right. And there's a property called component. And as long as you pass the reference to your component, Storybook knows that, okay, this is the component. So supposedly, if you wanted to render the default state of your component, let's just call it like default state, you can actually do something like this, right? And in Storybook, we have a construct called args, which basically are your props or inputs that can be passed to your component. And then if you wanted to do that in Storybook previously with CSF2, you would do something like this. But when you think about it, we have access to the component reference, and we know that we want to pass args down. So internally, Storybook actually just defines that as an implicit render function. And so there, you don't need to do anything.
Okay. So before you would have had to write that. Now,
correct.
It's just we don't need to make
magic.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Magic scares me sometimes, Yann, but yeah, this is cool.
If you want to override it to wrap it in something or to compose components together, it's still around, but you don't have to write it.
So this is giving a render property here. This is overriding it, correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
So you could potentially, I actually have an error in JSX. But basically you can override your render function, and then that would just render your component.
Right.
But because I want to also mock my data, and I don't want to just pass nothing, I want to reuse the mocks which were defining my success story. So I can, because my success story is also just an object, I can actually just spread it in like that. And then the component should be properly mocked. And let me just check over here. Yeah, let me change this to another restaurant and maybe refresh. Yeah, it was just a hiccup on mock service worker. But essentially now I get my mock instead of doing the actual request. And after that, what I want to do is I want to add some interactions to actually get this component into a different state. So I have this play function annotation, which is an asynchronous function that receives a context from Storybook. And then from there, I can do a bunch of stuff. So this context contains what we call a canvas element. So if I just console log it, context.canvas element, what you would see, and I need a little more real estate again. what you would see in the console is this element. So this is pretty much an element that wraps your component or your story. And essentially, once I have that element, I can use tools like testing library to do queries on top of it. And Storybook provides wrappers, which are browser compatible for Storybook for testing library. So let's do the following. I'm going to say canvas equals within, which is a helper function from Storybook testing library. And then I'm going to pass the context.canvas element. And then from there on, I want to query something so I can interact with it. So for instance, if I say, oh, well, Copilot is already doing something for me. But let's say canvas dot, and then I have all these queries that I can do. Let's say I want to get the element with the cheeseburger text. So find by text. And then let's pass a cheeseburger regex. I want to await it. And let's say I want to put it into a variable like food item. If I save it, that executes, but like nothing, I don't see something happening, right? We also have an add-on called interactions, which essentially, if I click here, I bring my add-on panel, and the add-on interactions actually parses your code or proxies your code, and then provides the feedback right here in the panel. So as I'm writing my code, I can actually visualize what's getting executed. So let's say I want to use user event, which is also a helper coming from Storybook testing library, and I want to click on that food item. I also want to await it so that I can see in the panel. And as you could see, the component rendered, the play function executed. I managed to get this cheeseburger element and click on it. And I can also see that in the panel.
Very cool.
So
that food item object what is that? Is that a HTML element, or is that?
Thank you, TypeScript. Yeah,
very cool.
So it's pretty much the same thing as testing library. The only difference is that this is getting executed in the browser.
Gotcha. Could we not have just called click on that HTML element itself?
Let's do that then. I'm just gonna do this. So
I imagine we couldn't
that
await
state.
that, right? But
so you do get the same experience, but sometimes it is tricky. So the reason I don't use this normally is because sometimes you might want to like await for certain events to happen, or like you want to have some retriability or stuff like that, which is all encapsulated by testing library. And when you use things like that, you only get one chance, right?
Right.
So,
like that click is just a synchronous call that's just going to unblock as soon as you've clicked. So you don't have any guarantees like you did on your line 112 there, where you're actually awaiting that promise resolving.
Exactly. And on top of that, like I could potentially, instead of writing this, I could also have used document or canvas element dot query selector and pass an XPath to like the text. But then you don't get the robustness that testing library provides. And just to add the cherry on top here.
And the debuggability in Storybook, those wrapper functions from Storybook testing library, they're just calling testing library under the hood, but because you're using Storybook, it shows up in the debugging panel on the left.
So essentially,
it doesn't have
I see.
So essentially, not only these elements are shown, which provide the code which we just wrote, but you can actually interact with them. So if I want to go back a step, it actually goes to each of the steps. So and then I can click here to rerun all of the steps.
How is that working? Are you snapshotting the DOM itself, or?
This is the most interesting thing. There's no snapshotting at all. Any of the steps are actually just the real execution up to that step.
Really?
So basically, if you have like 10 steps and you want to go back to step number 9, you will re-execute from 0 to 9, let's say, for 1 to 9.
I see. Okay. So you kind of reset the to the original state, and then you start walking through the play function again.
Exactly.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
That's really.
And the reason that there's an await on every line is because the play function is just sitting there awaiting, and then when you hit next, it'll let that promise go. To the next step. Yeah.
Makes sense. Well, I'm used to like Selenium, so I'm used to having like a lot of those awaits all over the place, right? So, sorry, what were you going to say, Yann?
A little more interesting, we also provide, so over here you see Storybook testing library is one of the imports. We also have another one called Storybook jest, which is essentially just a wrapper to the expect construct from jest.
Mm-hmm.
So you can actually write some assertions. So I can await, let's say, expect, something like this. Thank you, Copilot again. So I don't want add to cart. I want to get by test ID model, which is basically just this model, which is open. And I want to expect it to be in the document. So not only I am making an interaction to see my component specific state, but I'm also making sure that it exists in the DOM. So if I say not to be in the document, let's say, it actually fails. And the failure is shown in the panel.
Oh,
that
wow.
to me is amazing. Like, it's what I was gonna say for Selenium. Like, it makes tools like this, or like Ghost Inspector or anything, you know, it makes them obsolete, or even Cypress, you know.
Yeah, so it's an actually quite interesting question, and I'm gonna show just one extra thing. I know we're short on time, but if you're running Storybook and you want to test your components, yes, a lot of people have been using Cypress to like visit Storybook and then assert that something is rendering correctly or something like that. But given that now with Storybook you can actually run the tests directly in your story.
Mm-hmm.
We basically have all of the testing capabilities directly in Storybook, but not only that, we also provide what we call a Storybook test runner, which essentially uses Playwright under the hood and then spins up a headless browser to visit your stories and runs the tests for you.
I didn't want to say it before, Yann, but the your play function here looks a lot like Storybook, like down to the context being passed in as the callback. So I was assuming there was some inspiration there from Playwright, but yeah, very cool. Sorry,
so essentially,
I interrupted again.
No worries. So the Storybook test runner not only actually runs and executes your tests from your play function, but if you don't even have that, you're just like rendering a button, let's say. Mm-hmm. It will check for the rendering errors. So let's say you're migrating from, I don't know, Ionic 3 to 4 or whatever, and there's a breakage in the rendering of your components because of that. The Storybook test runner is actually going to catch that. Hey, Nicholas. I love your contributions to open source, by the way. Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to run Storybook test runner. So I have a command called test-storybook, which also provides a watch mode. So I'm just going to do --watch.
Oh, wow.
So the thing is, the watch mode is going to detect the related changes, and it's going to test my stories based on that. So as you can see here, and hopefully this is good enough to read.
Yeah. Well, you're expecting that modal not to be in the document still. So
exactly.
I think it's failing as we expected. Yeah.
It is intentional. So basically what happened here was it detected that my change was related to a specific story, and it only ran tests for that given story. As you can see, it did a smoke test for most of the stories which do not have a play function. And then there was a play test for the modal open story. So
how did you zoom in like that, Yann? That was intense.
An accessibility feature from Mac. You just hold Control and woo. Anyways, so basically, not only you get that nice feedback on the CLI, but it's also like sometimes you don't know what's going on just by looking at text, right? And that's why we have Storybook. So it provides you a link that opens Storybook in that specific story with the failure with the add-on panel open. And I know we don't have a lot of real estate here. But as you can see, you get this very interesting experience that provides you like a headed and a headless experience at the same time. And it also gives you the browser logs so that you can also inspect it in CI, let's say, if there's a failure. So I'm just going to go ahead and fix that issue. So on Storybook, I see that everything is going fine. And the test runner ran all the tests within 2 seconds and told me like, okay, it's actually all good. So I think we're now providing...
Wait, that was two separate processes, right? When it ran in the browser, and we actually saw that succeed first, and then the test runner that you're running inside of this other process inside of VS Code, that was stepped through the same things, correct?
Well, let me show you then. Yeah, that is correct. And
Okay.
there's a reason for that. But let me show you something very interesting. Let me just go to something very simple like a button component. I'll just leave the test for later.
Mm-hmm.
And button stories, or even my button file actually. So because I'm using Vite, I have like hot module reloading working
Right.
almost instantly, right? So basically, the reason you saw these two processes is because I saved my file, Vite
See.
trigger
Okay.
hot module reloading. The browser responded to it, and then the test runner was detecting like, oh, I'm gonna run all of these tests and give you feedback. So the thing I find crazy is like if I go on VS Code and I do something like user settings, I think auto save, I think it's called auto save after delay. Wait, can I change the delay? Yeah. So every 5 milliseconds, I'm going to make my editor auto save.
Okay.
I'm going to show you the hot module reloading logs over here on the right. And I'm just going to type away. I am typing away. Look at that. I did not expect this to happen in 2023. So basically, we had 33 hot module reloading processes happening within like seconds as I was typing. And before, like it would take like 2-3 seconds just for one hot module reloading effect.
Yeah. We were pretty much watching you type in real time inside of your browser there. That was pretty neat.
There you go. So whoever was saying Storybook is slow, think again.
You proved it.
Well, so unfortunately, we're running out of time. We're past time, actually. We're 7 minutes over. But yeah, it's so awesome to have y'all here. Nicholas had a comment here about using Storybook Test Runner and play functions. So that's really cool. I actually was not aware of this until yesterday at Storybook Day, but it was very cool to see that kind of automation coming. It's an obvious next step. And I think, Michael, you talked about you're building this from the bottom up. And I think that shows in like the organic adoption. We saw it in the download charts. People are going right to 7. And it seems like y'all are making like just slowly going to the obvious next step, and you're building into something really cool. Like we saw at the start of the stream, I think like it's actually a legitimate source of inspiration now, where there's just all of these things are on catalog, like card components, any kind of component you just search for, you can see them all there. So yeah, really cool to see what y'all have been doing. Hats off. If I had a hat on, I'd be taking it off to y'all because
I do have one question for next though.
Yeah.
So when are we having the test runner as a configuration for the Storybook?
Well, I think you can now generate. Someone had submitted a PR, and it's in there. You can generate like a new target for Storybook Test Runner, but we don't generate anything out of it. So we should add it in there. It's the interaction testing and these types of things, along with MDX, are the next on my list.
Awesome. Well, the magic of the Storybook Test Runner is that you actually don't have to write any code, because as long as you have stories, you are testing them. So the play function is just like extra stuff, but the test runner just basically allows you to be confident without having to write more code.
Yeah, that's really cool to have those things built in without doing any more work on our side as developers. So cool. I think on that note, let's wrap this one up. Yann and Michael, thanks so much. Katerina, of course, thank you so much for coming by.
I'm going to say
cats.
goodbye with Milo.
Thanks for having me, Zach. This was really fun.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks y'all so much. Let's wrap it up there. We'll see y'all next time.
Thank you.
Yeah,
bye.